As we conclude today, Jack, we welcome you back, if you would come back up, and Ann. We're going to take a time of a few questions and responses by them in reaction to this day. I welcome Heidi Bussey to come up, one of my colleagues from the Planning Committee. She's going to help to direct this part. And in the next half an hour, hopefully some good thoughts will be shared, of course, but we thank Ann because I know she will be running out the door to the airport because she has to catch a flight in just a couple hours from now. So when she looks like she's running, you know why. So, okay, Heidi, please.
Thank you.
So let's start with any questions that anybody has for Ann while she was speaking. Anything you were wondering about? And I can bring the microphone to you. Who has a question? Here. Oh, way over there. Sorry. I'm on my way.
As you were talking about your ladder, it seems like if both people understood that, it would take an incredible amount of patience. How do you see that working out between, in a conversation either between a man and a woman, or two men, or does it get anywhere?
I don't think gender actually has anything to do with this one. I've seen women who are able to handle ladder conversations really well, and I've seen men who are able to handle ladder conversations really well, and I've seen women who've really screwed that up, and I've seen men who've really screwed that up. So I don't know if the gender thing has so much to do with it, but the being human thing, boy, that has a lot to do with it. Lot to do with it. And it is true that we are, as men and women, we are socialized in radically different ways. And so part of it has to do with, tell me what it is that you're seeing, particularly sometimes as a man, that you think that I'm missing, or tell me what it is that you think that you're seeing as a woman that you think that I'm missing. And it might be just becoming aware of the fact that our gender does impact the way that we view the world, and making that explicit in the conversation. Yeah, thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, that's good. Another one right over here. Can you hand that microphone down? Thank you.
Ann, thank you so much for your presentation. While you were speaking, it made it sound like a lot of these hard conversations were just between two people. What do you do, like that staff meeting where things get kind of crazy, or you are having difficulty having a conversation with a couple different people? Is there a different skill set you should use? Should you try to break it up and just have it with two people? Should you just bail and
cancel meeting? Yeah, I agree. I think that's more complicated when there's multiple people involved. I think the same, like let's name where we're at. Why are we looking at this differently? What are the different data points each of us have? How are we feeling about this differently? That can happen with many people. Where it gets particularly challenging, though, is when you've got a large group. It's almost like you need somebody to facilitate that conversation. And it's tough if you're the facilitator and a participant at the exact same time. So if over and over again in a staff meeting, you find yourself getting stuck at the same point, what can be really helpful is to bring in somebody outside just to facilitate the conversation, to make sure that everybody's voice gets heard. This is where I don't think it's necessarily a male-female thing, but I do think that there's a power differential dynamic that does enter into a lot of difficult conversations. That if you're the person who's in charge of the committee, or you're the pastor who's in charge of the staff, and you think of yourself as still just like, I'm just sharing my own point of view, it doesn't have any more weight than anybody else's. By virtue of role or power, you have, there's a weight to your voice that makes things a little bit unequal. So that unless someone from the outside is facilitating to help everybody speak as a participant, it's hard not to accidentally shut down conversation because your own viewpoint will have so much weight. And so that's what makes it a little bit tougher in doing it in a group.
Yes.
very quickly, I am I'm post-retired, or I'm now in retirement. I'm a retired social worker, psychotherapist. I'm on the board of something called Access Press, a disability-oriented paper. And you've been reading my mail. I try not to ingratiate people, and I'm sure I'll think of some bad things, but I can tell those later. But no, I'm joking. But that's really, I've been studying what's called narrative therapy, and I'm fed up with psychotherapy, and I'm fed up with the, although I'm embracing, I had a, what do you call that, I had a born-again experience about 3 weeks ago, but I take exception to really narrow views of life. I like diversity, and I'd like to be in touch with you and have your bibliography.
Oh, thanks.
Well, that's actually great because it would be wonderful. You have a couple books written, and so it'd be great. I think are they here? Are your books here?
They are. Yeah, the books are here.
So
and on the back of the handout, there's my my emails on there too. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say for a good connection.
Do.
Maybe one more question, and then I know Ann has to be on her way.
And first of all, the communication thing was interesting. It's much more complicated than I thought.
I know, honest to God.
It seems to me that something precedes the communications presentation you made, and that is if we're in a position of leadership with people, I think we have to give those people the feeling that they're valued, that they're comfortable in their environment and with you as the supervisor, and that they're important. And I think if we can accomplish those three things, that should enhance their level of communications.
Yeah. One of the things which I did not mention because of the shortness of this session is there's another book that I found super helpful called Beyond Reason. Like, what is it that motivates people? Because oftentimes, like I said, we move into advocacy mode, and we oftentimes give them a lot of persuasive reasons, but we know that we can't get them to move, and they're not shifting in their perspective. And it was research done out of the Harvard Negotiation Project by a man named Roger Fisher and Dan Shapiro, and they talked about, like when that tiger comes in the room and we flee, and we live to the next generation. They said, beyond just physical threats, we as a species are created to live in community. We have thrived best as a species when we live in community. And so there are also things that are wired within us that we will consider to be relational threats. And if one of these gets stepped on, these are not emotions in themselves, but these are things that if they get stepped on, they cause emotion to rise within us. And there are a lot of the things you named. So in Beyond Reason, he talks about 5 things. Everybody needs a sense of autonomy. Like they'd like to have a sense that I have some control over this area of my life. Everybody needs appreciation. We need people to notice what we've done, that we work someplace. Everybody needs a sense of affiliation, that I'm wanted, that I'm included. Everybody needs a sense of I have a role, that like if this organization is a drama, I'd like to know I have a valuable part in it. And everybody has some concerns around status, that I'm treated with the respect that I feel that I deserve based on my role, my education, my age, the years of experience that I've got. And those things, if you track in a difficult conversation, when did the conversation turn red? When did people all of a sudden start behaving in their ineffective selves? Almost always you could track it if you were able to do a tracing of the dialogue. It goes red when one of those gets stepped on. And you could look in your own conversation, which of those core emotional concerns are being stepped on for you? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a joy to be with you this afternoon.
Really fabulous.
Very much so.
So before we
turn this
depart,
over
I
to
want to
Jack.
give everybody a chance as well to ask Jack some questions. I know his presentation was obviously in the morning, and so think back to that presentation. And I know we have questions. So anything that you've been ruminating on or that particularly struck you that you wanted to ask Jack about?
And first of all, I want to say that the fact that I'm going second, I realize means that I'm not as important as Ann. But it doesn't bother me, okay? I just want to do that.
That's inference. We're inferring. Any questions? Yeah, over here.
I'm interested in your insights, wisdom on dealing with what you mentioned, the mass exodus of young adults.
Yeah. Well, I want to just admit, before I say anything that tries to dissect that I feel a little bit bewildered by it, to be honest with you. It happened so fast, it seemed to me. I mean, it's just like one day they were all here and the next day they were all gone. And so on one hand, I'm not sure that I understand it, but I think a lot about where I do see young people very engaged in church. So let me give you a little life snippet. I get asked to do a lot of talks in a lot of different places, and to be honest with you, 75 to 90% of the time when I walk into a Catholic audience, I can be pretty sure that I'm going to be with my peers in terms of age. And most of the people in the room are going to have white hair, gray hair, or no hair, which works for me. And but just so to get to my point, about 2 years ago, I was invited to do a presentation for something called the Christian Volunteer Network. What it is it's not exclusively Catholic, but it's predominantly Catholic organization that resources groups that do immersion experiences. So this is the group that helps people like Jesuit Volunteer Corps or Young Neighbors in Action or Ignatian Volunteer Corps, or there's a whole set of groups. Anyway, so I've got my typical backpack on my back, and I walk into the room, and there's about 500 people in the room, and I look and I thought, what's going on here? 80% of the people in the room were under 40, because this was a mission organization. This is where young people are getting really involved in working on issues that seem so important to the world. And they were all here, and this is a faith-based, this is a very, clearly faith-inspired, faith-based organization, and this is where they were. And my experience is, even with my own 3 daughters, is that when I can make a strong linkage between our faith tradition and caring for the world, they're all in. So, for example, my oldest daughter spent some time in Haiti with one of Mother Teresa's orphanages. I'll tell you a little story about that. So she, one of the things she did while she was there is that she went to the orphanage, and all she did was they asked her to just pick up little babies. Now, most of these, I don't know if any of you been to Haiti and seen these orphanages. They're basically like a hospice. It's like a hospice for babies, because a lot of the children that get dropped off are so chronically malnourished that the only thing that the sisters can do for them is provide a dignified way for them to die. There's just not the facilities or the resources to do what needs to be done. So what happens is parents have struggled hard to try to feed their kids. You've read the stories about moms making oil dirt cakes for their kids because all they have is oil. They mix it with dirt, that's dinner. Over time, that doesn't work. And what happens, especially with little children, is they drop them off at the orphanage just hoping that the sisters will take them in, because otherwise they're going to die. Anyway, let me get on with the story. So my daughter went there, and she basically spent a half a day picking up little stick babies and holding them. And one little guy in particular just wouldn't stop crying because he was so, in some ways his insides had become self-carnivorous. He was basically just, His insides were... Anyway, she picked him up. He wouldn't stop crying. She held him. He wouldn't stop crying. It's just a squeaky little sound, you know. And finally one of the sisters said, you know, darling, there's so many babies in this room, and we need you to pick them up, and you're going to have to put him down. And, you know, she's got tears in her eyes. She puts this little guy down. He dies later that day. And she came home, and, you know, she said, Dad, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be thinking about that little guy. And she was right, because, in fact, when she went to get her master's degree, guess what it was in? Public health. So that little guy and the lens of her faith deflected her entire life. Now, this is what compels young people. This is what keeps young people interested in church. You give them a great big mission, ask them to do something important with their life, show them how God's finger is in it. I think they want to stay. And just to be, I don't mean offensive, but I want to maybe to exaggerate the opposite. If church for them is bingo, basketball leagues, and potluck after potluck, as much as I like to eat, it isn't going to keep them. So I just feel like young people are hardwired for mission. Young people really want to do something important that they perceive to be important with their life. If they come to church and it doesn't feel alive with importance, I mean, even while we know the words are important, even while we know this liturgy is important, if it doesn't speak to something living and true that transcends not just, it transcends the hour that they're together for Mass, I think that's a problem. I'll try to make my other answers a lot shorter.
No, that was great. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm wondering, and if Ann were still here, I would ask her this same sort of question, but I'm wondering if, based on the work that you've done, the work you've done with parishes and, you know, consulting with people and all of this kind of stuff, could you maybe dialogue your presentation a little bit with some of the stuff that Ann was talking about? How are they?
I'll give it a try. Yeah. What I was trying to do this morning was to communicate what seems to be a very exciting and serious invitation from our Pope about going forward. And all of a sudden, like 6 little intersections are happening. So let me try one at a time, which is probably the best way. My inner voice is going crazy right now. And the problem is I don't have one inner voice. I got like 7. I feel dangerous sometimes. So one of my thoughts that's popping through my head right now is everybody quibbles. Right? I mean, in some ways, that was Ann was saying is we're sort of made to quibble. We're made to kind of navigate the tensions between us, and we can get better and better at that. And I think if Ann was here, she'd say, these are one set of...
I think Ann is here, actually.
Oh.
She hasn't left yet.
What am I... I have a lot of inner voices, but, someone could have said something to me. So I'll say this. I think Ann would agree that what she gave were a set of well-spoken, effective tips about how to navigate tension. But I don't think she would say, this is all there is to be said about it, right? So quibbling happens. Quibbling happens in any relationship worth anything. And if there's no quibbling going on, then it's probably a dead relationship. So my experience with church is, how do we raise the level of quibbling to something that's actually important? Like, I've seen people quibble over the color of the lines in the parking lot. And I would rather quibble about how do we solve poverty. I would rather raise the level of conversation to things that young people are going to be interested in. So yes, we could disagree about what's the best way to address this, But that quibbling will have a certain amount of energy and a compelling quality to it that keeps me here. But there is a lot of quibbling, this happens in the workplace, it happens in churches, it happens at home. There is a certain amount of quibbling that's like, do we really want to quibble about that, right? And how do we sort of raise that up? So to that end, there's a whole other set of techniques that you add to the drawer or the repertoire of how to navigate difficult issues, which I think are really worthy. And, you know, if we had another 2 days, probably Ann's got a whole bunch of other tools in her toolbox that she could help with. So that's one intersection that I see. Ann, since you are still here, and since she said, if Ann were here, why don't you answer that too?
No, I entirely agree with Jack. The one thing which I was thinking about is, I think oftentimes as church people, because we're afraid of conflict and we associate it with sin, we don't end up taking strong stands on things that we should stand up for. And so Jack, what he was doing this morning is he was setting us on fire and making us a little bit more courageous to get involved in conversations that would be easier for us to avoid. And I think that if we, a lot of times we don't go into difficult conversations because we're afraid if we mess something up, I might not be able to repair this relationship again. And my hope is that the more that I get involved in having difficult conversations, it gives me more courage to say, I can actually stand up for what it is that I believe in, and I can do so in such a way that I'm going to actually build deeper relationships with people rather than fragment them. And so I see the two skill sets as being entirely complementary, that hopefully the more and more difficult conversations I have that go well, because I'm using this set of tools, makes me even more brazen in attempting even harder conversations out there. That's one point where I would see intersection.
Yeah, and another thought comes to mind. So this year I'm teaching a class in Louisville called Spirituality and Politics. My dad, I was talking to my dad. My dad said, "Oh, you're teaching a class this year. What is it?" I said, "It's Spirituality and Politics." And he said, "What is wrong with you?" Now, so one of the reasons I was interested in offering the class is because a lot of people feel so politically disoriented right now, that the United States that they thought they knew doesn't look safe anymore. And so I thought, we dig right into the great religious traditions and what they had to say about politics, and we would talk politics and get into the nitty-gritty of it. And what people wanted to talk about was, how do I talk to my mom or my dad about politics? And so, to your point, Ann, you start off with this, we're going to march on Washington, but it gets reduced to, I can't talk to my brother about Trump. That's what it gets reduced to. So the question is, if you can't navigate that relationship, you're probably not going to get to marching on Washington, or if you do, you're going to leave a lot of people behind. Does that seem right? Yeah.
Okay, one last question, and then we will have just a few closing words, and we'll wrap up for the day. Yeah. Oh, way over here. All right, I'm on my way. Great. Thank you. Just got to get you the microphone here.
So this is kind of a bigger question. As you were speaking, I heard you talking about living out the love that we are experiencing in our community, and early on you recognized that that's not always all that we're living out of. There is pain in some of our families, and I think that pairing your talk with Ann's was really lovely in acknowledging some of that conflict and that pain. I want to invite you to talk about how do we live mission in such a way that we are transforming our pain that we are living with rather than transmitting it, as we all have these really great aspirations to share that love and bind together in love, but we all live with pain.
Yeah.
That's an easy one. I'm kidding.
Usually at this point I say, well, I would like to hear what the rest of you have to say now. You know, I suppose this might be an opportunity to talk about the best way to do this work in my experience. And that is, nothing I talked about this morning really can be done by yourself. I think there's a reason Jesus pulled 12 people together, was because I think, Ann made this point, you know, we're really, we are genetically, we are evolutionarily, we are socially meant for each other. We do best in packs. We do best in tribes. We do best in churches. We do best in community. I think that's what we're made for. That's what we do best. So, to answer your question, I think it's in community, relationships of kinship, of support and nurture and nourishment. That's where we heal, I think. It's in the places where I get the support, where I can be with people. I say this, it seems to me that we want communities where people laugh and cry together easily, and that's where the healing happens. And so it's where the nourishment of that sort of home base, that the nourishment of kindred spirits, the nourishment of working together, and that I heal up, that a lot of the biggest wounds soften. And so I'm not bringing a lot of my crises into relationships where I'm trying to address a struggle that's not my struggle, but I come in some ways a little bit cleaner and don't bring a lot of damage with me because I have this community of support, and I'm coming together with a group of people. So there's like a vessel of shared wisdom and shared power and possibility because we're doing this together. And the minute that I get out of the minute somebody gets out of hand, the group sort of, I mean, this is an image, sort of surrounds the person and said, you know, you got some pain around this. You know, it might be good just to sort of take a little step back. Now that's an image, but does it make sense? Do you hear the point? Am I clear enough? I guess is what I'm asking. Ann, do you have some thoughts? Because it seems like it sort of bleeds over into certainly what you were talking about.
I think there's a way in which whenever we go out to meet another community, we might like to think we're only bringing our giftedness over there, but we're also, when we come over here, we're bringing some of what you're naming as that pain in our community. And that's where I hope that some of the skills that I'm talking about in redeeming conflict enables you, when you have these conversations, to know there's no way of doing mission perfectly right. You're going to always end up, even with the best of intentions, sometimes hurting people. There's a one of the chapters that it's a frame that they get that I learned through Harvard Negotiation Project that has been super helpful to me, is distinguishing between intent and impact. I can have the best of intent, and other people might still end up getting hurt by it. And it's very possible that I might end up getting hurt by other people and that they had the best of intentions. And oftentimes we conflate those two, so that if I have good intentions, I think that you should recognize I meant well and that you shouldn't be hurt by whatever that I've done, and that you should at least recognize that I didn't mean to hurt you and you shouldn't be angry at me about it. But the other hand is when I'm hurt by something, I'm pretty sure you meant to do it, right? Or at least you were negligent or have some sort of fatal character flaw. And it's hard for me to assume you had the best of intentions. And I think oftentimes when we are filled with fire, when we have a lot of zeal about something, that zeal is so beautiful and it's so good. And we should know that fire can warm the hearth and it can burn down the house, right? And so that we need to know when we go out with zeal, we need to develop accompanying skills for apology and for forgiveness and for deep listening. And like those two we shouldn't have one without the other. We need both of those in the work of mission.
Thank you. Thank you. Fabulous. Thank you both so much.